Hi, this is Misha. I have been revisiting ships from my first couple of videos. Going into more detail, I went over the Romulan fleet, the First Contact fleet, and by this point I have pretty much the Wolf 359 fleet. So now it's time to get into the Klingons. Now, I've already posted a video really talking about the bird of prey. So this is, I guess you can call it kind of a preliminary. And this Klingon will kind of be broken into two general types. We're first going to go over the Battlecruiser ships. These are the large, battleships. And then later, in other episodes, we'll look at the different birds of prey, which are the small, nimble, and usually atmospheric capable craft, where the battleships are not. And chronologically speaking, the first Klingon Battlecruiser battleship we know of is the D5 from Enterprise. Well, at least, sort of. While we only finally saw the D5 on screen with Enterprise, this ship had actually been teased in dialogue and commentary in Deep Space Nine. Even the original animated series had a kind of a version of a D5. And of course, by the very nature of the D7, we could reasonably assume that there were previous versions. So when this finally appeared on screen in Enterprise, I was very happy. And then when Eagle Moss did a model, as I've said in a few other videos, there are some of these ships that are kind of the reason I have these little critters, and this is one of them. This is just not something you're going to find much of anywhere else. And I think they did a fantastic job with the D5 model. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Interesting about Klingon ships, even though Klingons are a very important race, and we know a lot about them as a people, their ships, even though seen on the screen a lot, are kind of an enigma. We don't hear much about their engineering, their propulsion, their power. We know some about their weapons, mostly that they blow things up. But their ships aren't really gone into detail. I think Romulan ships, even though we don't see as many different variations, when we see them, we hear a little more about the technical, because Romulans tend to be technical people. Klingons are kind of left to be more the Conan the Barbarians and space people. Anywho, we first see a version of this, I think it was Season 2 of Enterprise, when it's a tanker, or at least this model. But really the D5 is seen a few different times in Season 4, and also known as the Good One. This is the top-of-the-line battleship, Battlecruiser. It's about 198 meters long. We don't know the crew, but we can assume, honestly, as much as Klingons like to pack their people in, well over 100, I wouldn't even be shocked if someone said 200 if you count troops, because they really packed them in. We do know it had a maximum warp of 6, and could cruise near warp 5. It has 2 large disruptor cannons on the bottom. It's worth noting that on the tanker version, instead of cannons, there would be deuterium fuel tanks. It does have a lot of the classic battle cruiser lines. Got kind of these wings, very large warp nacelles, kind of flattened, flared out. There are other disruptors. There are photon torpedoes. It has a bit of the housing in the back for the engines, but not really the kind of more iconic upswept we'll see later. It has this kind of rigging, piping, which is something the Enterprise crew did. They said, the FX teams and the modelers, they kind of make it look like an old school sailing ship to kind of make it look more primitive. It's, piping. I think it's neat. And because they were working with CGI and computers, and they could more easily manage more fine details like that. But it kind of gave a certain lineage in their attempt to make these seem older than previous ships. It's a very large, like top down, but a very skinny, very flat ship, face on. So probably has only a few decks, although they might be large. And of course, side to side, most of our mass is in the middle. And then we have these wings, which probably don't have a lot going on. So it is relatively long. The mass is what you see. And that's really all we know. Like I said, we don't really get a lot of technical data on Klingon ships. We do know that these were in service by the early to mid 22nd century, and would have still been in service at least into the 23rd century, early to mid. Klingons, they like keeping their ships around, but there are references about the old D5s in the TOS type era, so they were probably recently pulled out of service around the 2260s. So meaning they probably served for a good 100 years. I'm sure in upgraded form. And it should go without saying, but in Enterprise and everything, these did not have cloaking devices. Klingons should not have cloaks. That's one mistake they did not make in Enterprise. Thank God. The Romulan situation was sort of justifiable, at least tolerable. It would be really silly to give Klingons cloak early, wouldn't it? I can't imagine a series that would be so silly to give Klingons cloak before we saw the Bird of Prey in the movies. So, good thing no one's done that, right? So yeah, our first Klingon battlecruiser, the D5 from the 22nd century. Only seen in Enterprise, but mentioned in TOS and Deep Space Nine. Well, to be exact, TAS, the animated series, but close enough for government work. Alrighty, that's about it. If you could, like, share, subscribe, and as always, feel free to comment, and we can chat about nerd stuff below. Qapla'.